1 second. I have to flip with one hand here.
Okay, so just for the viewers, um, Jeremiah is a Calvinist pastor, and he thinks that the ark right here is the antitype. Correct, Jeremiah?
Correct. Yep. You represented me correctly.
Okay. All right. Now in verse 21, let me get the ESV up for you.
Okay.
It says, "Baptism, which corresponds to this, now saves you, not as a removal of dirt from the body, but as an appeal to God for a good conscience through the resurrection of Jesus Christ." Okay.
All right. So as I explained verse 21, I want us to keep in mind three things: the ark, the water, and the persons being saved in the ark, and the water is being used as an instrument of judgment. Also, I want us to keep in mind, like you rightly pointed out, baptism does not always entail wet immersion. Now, I would argue, and this isn't a rabbit trail, but this qualifies kind of how I interpret epistles versus the book of Acts being more of a narratival book. Epistles are meant to give us theology and doctrine. And so one way to show that baptism, I would say every time in the epistles, is not referring to water baptism, is clearly how Paul uses it in 1 Corinthians 10. I think it's verse 2. You may have to double check me on that. But we see that the people of Israel were baptized into Moses as the sea was being parted. So they weren't being immersed into the water of the sea. They were baptized into the authority of Moses. So what we see here is we kind of see that baptism, which now corresponds or is an antitype to what you just read, saves you. I would say, okay, we already know that water is being used as an instrument of judgment, and then I would say, and I think you would strongly disagree, he qualifies even further and says, hey guys, not as a removal of dirt from the body. I believe Peter is saying, guys, I'm not saying the water in water baptism is salvific in any way, shape, or form. In fact, it was an instrument of judgment with Noah. And so we're asking the question, okay, if water is not salvific here, what is? Well, that picture would be the ark. And then he goes on to say, and that's a picture as an appeal to God for a good conscience through the resurrection of Jesus Christ. So a couple more things here, and I know I'm talking a lot, but I don't want to take over. I would say Jesus is the ark of our salvation. When we look to him in saving faith, I would say a faith that realizes that you cannot do anything in order to gain a right standing with God in terms of the works that we can do and we accomplish, whether that be works of law, whether that be a commandment to get up and do X, Y, and Z.
Yeah.
But he says, as an appeal to God for a good conscience. So I would say faith from the heart is not being mentioned explicitly here in this text, but if you look with me earlier in this chapter, look with me at verse 15, because he mentions a good conscience earlier and explains what that is. So verse 15, the ESV says, "But in your hearts honor Christ the Lord as holy, always being prepared to make a defense for anyone who asks for a reason for the hope that is in you, yet do this with gentleness and respect, having a good conscience, so that when you are slandered, those who revile your good behavior in Christ may be put to shame." So I believe having a good conscience is qualified above saying sanctifying the Lord in your hearts. That would entail trusting him as Kyrios, right? You understand that as the divine name. So in summary, and then I'll kick it back over to you, is
well, what's appeal? What's appeal mean?
So appeal is acknowledging who Christ is, right?
This says, but as an appeal, something, whatever this appeal is up here somewhere.
Sure, I have no problem with that. So let me say this summary sentence or two, so maybe can tie it all together. You got the story of Noah. They were 8 souls that would have been condemned along with the rest of mankind by the judgment of water, yet they were saved by God's grace by the ark, and that ark is a picture not of water baptism, but of the salvation that's found in Jesus Christ alone. And we have a good conscience. We have an appeal of a good conscience when we sanctify the Lord in our hearts. And we would understand that to be by faith. Okay. Go ahead.
All right. All right, that's pretty much it as far as I'm going to go through it, and may play your explanation next week.
What I'm curious before we hop off,
Yeah.
what would be your immediate objection to say that baptism requires a wet immersion here?
Oh, the element, actually, let me see here.